The wailing of baby Thomas echoed through the rickety cabin, drowning out even the sound of the relentless Wyoming wind that whistled through the gaps in the wooden walls. Xavier Calloway paced frantically across the uneven floorboards, his usually steady hands trembling as he cradled his 3-month-old son against his broad chest. 6 days since his wife had passed, and Xavier hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch. "Hush now, little one," he murmured, bouncing the infant with increasing desperation. "Please, Thomas, your pa needs you to quiet down." But the baby only screamed louder, his tiny face crimson with effort, tiny fists flailing against Xavier's chambray shirt. The year was 1879, and Xavier, once the most respected cowhand in Campbell County, found himself utterly defeated by 8 pounds of inconsolable infant. The irony wasn't lost on him. He could break the wildest Mustang, face down rustlers without flinching, and navigate treacherous mountain passes in blinding snowstorms. But he couldn't soothe his own child. A knock at the door barely registered over Thomas's screams. When it came again, more insistent, Xavier strode across the room and yanked it open with his free arm. Willow Eden stood on his porch, her honey-blonde hair tucked beneath a practical bonnet, a basket of provisions hanging from one arm. The schoolteacher from the settlement had been bringing food every few days since the funeral. "Mr. Calloway," she greeted him, her voice raised to be heard over Thomas's distress. "I brought some bread and stew." Her eyes, the warm brown of autumn leaves, took in his disheveled appearance the stubbled jaw, the dark circles under bloodshot eyes, the wrinkled shirt stained with what might have been milk or worse. "Much obliged," he managed to reply, stepping back to allow her entry, though embarrassment flushed his face. The cabin was in disarray, dishes piled in the washbasin, laundry heaped in corners, the bed unmade. Evidence of a man drowning in grief and responsibility. Willow set her basket on the table and turned toward the wailing infant. Without asking permission, she reached for Thomas. "May I?" Too exhausted to protest, Xavier surrendered his son to her capable hands. Willow cradled the baby against her shoulder, one hand supporting his bottom, the other gently patting his back. She began to sway, her movements deliberate and measured. "You're bouncing him too quickly," she said, her tone gentle rather than accusatory. "Rock him slow, like the wind through wheat." Xavier's brow furrowed. "Like what?" "The wind through wheat," she repeated, demonstrating with her body. "Watch the wheat fields on a summer afternoon. The stalks don't jerk and bounce, they sway, rhythmic and gentle." Her own movements mimicked this pattern as she spoke, a slow, hypnotic rocking that already seemed to be lessening Thomas's cries. "Babies need rhythm that reminds them of the womb," she continued, her voice dropping softer as the infant's wails subsided into hiccuping sobs. "Your heart is racing with worry, and he feels that. Slow down. Breathe deep." Xavier watched in astonishment as Thomas's cries diminished to whimpers, then to sniffles, and finally to the even breathing of sleep. Within minutes, his son, who had been inconsolable for what felt like days, slumbered peacefully against Willow's shoulder. "How did you?" he began, then trailed off, afraid speaking too loudly might break the spell. Willow smiled. "I helped raise my 4 younger siblings after my mother passed. Picked up a few things." She continued the gentle swaying motion. "When was the last time you slept, Mr. Calloway?" He rubbed his face, the stubble rough against his palms. "Name's Xavier, and I don't rightly recall." Willow studied him. At 32, Xavier Calloway cut an impressive figure despite his current state, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the clear blue of mountain lakes. A respected rancher who'd built his modest spread through honest work and determination. The loss of his wife in childbirth had left him unmoored, clearly drowning in grief and the sudden responsibility of an infant. "Sit down," she instructed gently. Eat something while he's quiet. I can stay a while. Too exhausted to argue, Xavier sank into a chair at the rough-hewn table. As Willow served him stew one-handed, still cradling Thomas, he watched her with a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment. "Why are you helping me?" he asked bluntly. Willow, 26 and unmarried, met his gaze steadily. "Because everyone needs help sometimes, Mr. Calloway. Even strong men like yourself." He lowered his eyes to his bowl. "Xavier," he corrected again, his voice rough. "Xavier," she echoed, the name soft on her lips. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling around the cabin's corners. Inside, for the first time in days, there was peace. After the meal, with Thomas still sleeping, Willow helped Xavier establish a rudimentary routine. She showed him how to properly swaddle the baby, demonstrated the rocking technique again, and wrote down simple instructions for formula preparation. "I'll return tomorrow," she promised as she prepared to leave, "and perhaps we might discuss a more permanent arrangement." Xavier's brow furrowed. "Permanent arrangement? Your son needs care while you work your ranch," she stated practically. "School term finished last week, and I have the summer months free. I could help for fair compensation." The offer left him speechless. He hadn't thought beyond surviving each day, each hour. The idea of having someone having Willow help with Thomas seemed both a lifeline and an admission of failure. "Think about it," she said, donning her bonnet. "You don't have to decide now." After she left, Xavier sat in the rocking chair by the stove, Thomas sleeping against his chest. He tried to mimic Willow's gentle swaying motion, like the wind through wheat. Such a strange way to describe it, but it worked. His son's warm weight and even breathing eventually lulled Xavier into the first real sleep he'd had in days. The next morning, Thomas woke him at dawn with hungry cries. Xavier changed and fed his son using Willow's instructions, finding the task slightly less daunting than before. His ranch hands would be arriving soon to begin the day's workmen who'd been carrying extra weight since Marianne's passing, trying to give their boss time to grieve. Xavier couldn't continue imposing on their goodwill. When Willow arrived mid-morning, Xavier had made his decision. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford, not with Thomas depending on him. "About your offer," he said after she'd settled in. "I accept with gratitude. Whatever wage you think fair, I'll pay." Willow's smile was warm but businesslike. "We'll discuss terms after I've seen what needs doing. Now, let me show you how to bathe him properly." The days established a new rhythm. Willow arrived at sunrise and departed after supper, spending her days caring for Thomas and gradually bringing order to the household. Xavier returned to his duties around the ranch but made time to learn from Willow how to interpret different cries, how to feed and bathe and comfort his son. 2 weeks into this arrangement, a violent summer storm rolled in from the mountains. The sky darkened ominously at midday, and Xavier rode in from checking fence lines to find Willow watching the approaching clouds with concern. "You shouldn't try to make it back to town in this," he said, removing his hat as he entered. "The creek crossing floods quick in these storms." As if emphasizing his point, a tremendous crack of thunder shook the cabin, making both of them jump. Thomas, napping in his cradle, startled awake with a wail. Willow lifted him, automatically beginning that gentle swaying motion that had become familiar to Xavier. "I believe you're right," she agreed, raising her voice over another rumble of thunder. "It would be prudent to stay until it passes." But the storm didn't pass. It intensified, bringing sheets of rain that turned the yard to mud and sent water streaming beneath the cabin door despite Xavier's efforts with towels. Wind howled around the corners, finding every crack in the wooden walls. By sunset, it was clear Willow wouldn't be returning to town that night. "You'll take the bed," Xavier stated firmly. stoking the fire against the unseasonable chill the storm had brought. "Thomas and I will manage out here." Willow stood at the window, watching lightning illuminate the landscape in brief, brilliant flashes. "That's not necessary. I can sleep in the chair." "I won't hear of it," he insisted. "It's proper that you take the bed." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Proper would be me not staying at all, Mr. Calloway." "Xavier," he corrected automatically. "Xavier," she conceded, turning from the window to face him. "Propriety aside, I won't put you out of your bed. The chair will suffice." He shook his head, stubborn. "My mother would haunt me if I let a lady sleep in a chair while I took a bed." Their standoff was interrupted by Thomas, who began to fuss. Willow picked him up, checking his diaper and then settling into the rocking chair to feed him. Xavier watched them, a strange tightness in his chest. This woman, virtually a stranger weeks ago, now knew his son's needs better than he did. It should have wounded his pride. Instead, he felt only gratitude. "We'll both sleep poorly if we continue this argument," Willow said finally. "The bed is large enough. We can share it back to back with Thomas between us in his basket. That way we both rest and propriety is somewhat maintained." Xavier's ears reddened. "That's not I didn't mean to suggest." "I know you didn't," she interrupted gently. "But it's the most practical solution. Unless you'd prefer the floor." The floor, he knew from camping trips, would leave him stiff and useless for ranch work tomorrow. Practicality won out over propriety. "Back to back," he agreed gruffly. Later, in the strange intimacy of darkness, Xavier lay rigid at the edge of his bed, acutely aware of Willow's presence behind him. Between them, Thomas slept in his basket, oblivious to the adult's discomfort. "May I ask about her?" Willow's voice was soft in the darkness. "About Marianne?" Xavier stared at the wall, wondering why the question didn't pain him as he expected. "What would you like to know? How you met? What she was like?" Thomas should know these things someday. The rain drummed on the roof as Xavier gathered his thoughts. "We met at a harvest dance in Cheyenne. I was 25, just starting to build this place. She was visiting her cousin." He paused. "She had the brightest laugh, drew you in like a moth to flame. Smart as a whip, too. Could calculate figures faster than any banker." "She sounds remarkable." "She was," he agreed. "Too good for this rough country life, if I'm honest. But she chose it. Chose me." He swallowed. "She wanted children, something fierce." Was overjoyed about Thomas, even when the doctor warned there might be complications. Willow was quiet for a moment. "She'd be proud of you, of how you're caring for her son." Xavier's laugh held no humor. "I'm barely managing, even with your help." "But you are managing," Willow insisted. "Many men would have sent the baby to relatives or hired a full-time nurse. You're learning, adapting." The wind howled outside, a lonesome sound that matched the emptiness Xavier had carried since Marianne's death. But tonight, somehow, that emptiness felt less absolute. "What about you?" he asked suddenly. "No husband waiting for you in town?" "No," she answered simply. "I came west to teach 3 years ago. Haven't met anyone who—" "Well, it doesn't matter." "Seems a shame," he said before he could consider his words. "A woman like you." Her silence made him wonder if he'd offended her. Then softly, "What kind of woman am I, Xavier?" The question hung in the darkness between them. "Kind," he said finally. "Patient. Capable. The children must adore you." "They do," she agreed, a smile in her voice. "Teaching brings me joy. Then that's what matters." They fell silent, listening to the storm and Thomas's soft breathing. Xavier found himself more relaxed than he'd been in weeks, despite the unusual sleeping arrangement. Just before sleep claimed him, he murmured, "Thank you, Willow, for everything." Her whispered, "You're welcome," followed him into dreams. The storm lingered for 2 days, forcing Willow to extend her stay. They established careful boundaries. Xavier slept in the chair despite Willow's protests after that first night, and they maintained a professional distance during daylight hours. But the forced proximity shifted something between them. Conversations flowed more easily over meals. They developed a natural rhythm, caring for Thomas, moving around each other in the small cabin with increasing comfort. On the evening the rain finally ceased, leaving behind a world washed clean and gleaming. Xavier found himself reluctant for Willow to leave. He hitched the wagon to drive her back to town, loading her belongings with deliberate slowness. "I'll return in the morning," she assured him, misinterpreting his mood as concern for Thomas. "I know," he replied, helping her up to the wagon seat. "We'll manage tonight." The drive to town followed the swollen creek, water rushing copper red with silt from the hills. Willow sat beside him, her bonnet shielding her face from the setting sun. Thomas slept in a basket between them, lulled by the wagon's gentle rocking. "I've been thinking," Xavier said as the town's buildings came into view, "about a more permanent arrangement." Willow turned to him, questioning, "This back and forth every day, it's a lot of travel for you." "There's the old cabin, about 100 yards behind the main house. My first place before I built the bigger one. Simple but sound. Could be fixed up proper." He kept his eyes on the road. "You could stay there, be closer for Thomas." "Are you offering me permanent employment?" she asked carefully. "Until school starts again, at least," he confirmed. "Seems sensible." Willow was quiet so long he feared he'd overstepped. Finally, she said, "People would talk. People always talk," he countered. "Question is whether we care more about their talk than what's best for Thomas." "And what about after summer ends, when I must return to teaching?" Xavier hadn't thought that far ahead. "We'll figure something out. Maybe by then I'll be better at this fathering business." She smiled, though something like sadness flickered in her eyes. "You're already better than you realize." After another moment's consideration, she nodded. "I accept your offer, Mr. Calloway. The cabin arrangement seems practical." "Xavier," he reminded her, inexplicably pleased by her acceptance. "Xavier," she echoed, her smile warming him more than the June sun. 3 days later, Willow moved into the refurbished cabin. Xavier and his ranch hands had worked tirelessly to make it habitable, repairing the roof, replacing broken window panes, building simple but sturdy furniture. It sat nestled against a copse of cottonwoods, close enough to the main house to be convenient but far enough for privacy. The arrangement worked better than either had anticipated. Willow cared for Thomas during the day while Xavier worked the ranch. In the evenings, they often shared meals, and Xavier spent time with his son, becoming more confident in his parenting. As June ripened toward July, the ranch flourished under Xavier's renewed attention, and Thomas thrived with Willow's care. One evening in early July, Xavier returned from town to find Willow sitting on his porch, Thomas cradled in her arms as she sang softly to him. The sight stopped him in his tracks. Silhouetted against the golden light spilling from the cabin, they created a tableau of domestic tranquility he'd never thought to see again after Marianne's death. A sharp pang, not quite pain, not quite pleasure, lanced through his chest. He'd become increasingly aware of Willow as a woman, not merely his son's caretaker. The grace of her movements, the gentle curve of her smile, the intelligence in her amber eyes, these details occupied his thoughts at odd moments throughout his days. "You're late," she called, spotting him. "I was starting to worry." The concern in her voice warmed him as he climbed the porch steps. "Got delayed at the mercantile. Mrs. Patterson wanted news of Thomas." He sat beside her on the bench, peering at his son's sleeping face. "How was he today?" "Perfectly charming," Willow replied. He smiled a real smile, not just gas. Xavier's eyebrows rose. "And I missed it?" "You'll see plenty more," she assured him, then hesitated. "I had a visitor today, Mrs. Blackwell from town." Something in her tone put Xavier on alert. What did she want? Willow shifted Thomas in her arms. Ostensibly to bring a basket from the Ladies' Aid Society. Actually, to satisfy her curiosity about our arrangement. Xavier's jaw tightened. What business is it of hers? People talk, Willow reminded him, echoing his own words. A widow with a young baby, employing an unmarried woman who lives on his property, it invites speculation. Idle gossip, he dismissed, though he knew she was right. Did she upset you? Willow shook her head. I'm not easily shaken by busybodies. But she mentioned the school board has concerns. Xavier sat up straighter. About your teaching position? They haven't said anything directly, but Mrs. Blackwell hinted that my living arrangement might be deemed inappropriate for someone shaping young minds. Willow's voice remained steady, but Xavier noted how her arms tightened protectively around Thomas. That's ridiculous, he growled. You're the best teacher this town's ever had. Her smile held a touch of sadness. Thank you for that, but perception matters in my profession. She rose, carefully transferring the sleeping baby to Xavier's arms. I should return to my cabin. Your supper's keeping warm on the stove. As she turned to leave, Xavier caught her hand impulsively. Willow, don't let them trouble you. We've done nothing wrong. Her fingers were warm within his calloused grip. I know that, Xavier, but sometimes that's not enough. Gently extracting her hand, she descended the porch steps and disappeared down the path to her cabin, her figure gradually blending with the gathering twilight. Xavier remained on the porch long after she'd gone, Thomas sleeping against his chest, his mind churning. He'd inadvertently put Willow's livelihood at risk. The thought settled like a stone in his stomach. The next morning, he rose before dawn and rode to town. Judge Parker, who headed the school board, was known for starting his days early at the town's only cafe. Xavier found him there, nursing a cup of coffee and reading a tattered newspaper. Calloway, the older man, greeted him. Early business in town? Xavier removed his hat, conscious of the dust on his clothes and the stubble on his jaw. Wanted to speak with you, sir. About Miss Eden. The judge's bushy eyebrows rose. What about her? I understand there's been talk about her living arrangement at my ranch. Judge Parker set down his coffee cup. There has indeed. I want to make it clear that everything is above board, Xavier stated firmly. Miss Eden has her own cabin. She's caring for my son while I run the ranch, nothing more. Son, I've known you since you came to this territory with nothing but ambition and a good horse, the judge said, leaning back in his chair. Your character isn't in question, but Miss Eden is in a more delicate position. Because she's a woman, Xavier supplied, frustration edging his voice. Because she's responsible for children, the judge corrected. Parents are particular about who influences their young. Xavier leaned forward. Judge, she's the finest teacher this town has seen. Surely that counts for something. It counts for a great deal, the older man agreed, which is why the board hasn't taken any action despite Mrs. Blackwell's enthusiastic concerns. He studied Xavier thoughtfully. However, perception does matter. If you two were courting officially, that would change things considerably. Xavier blinked, caught off guard. Courting? Just an observation, the judge said mildly, returning to his newspaper. Good day, Calloway. Xavier left the cafe more unsettled than when he'd entered. Courting Willow had never entered his mind, or rather, he hadn't allowed it to. Marianne's death was still an open wound, and his focus had been survival, not romance. Yet, as he rode back to the ranch, he found himself considering the possibility. Willow was everything admirable, intelligent, kind, capable. She'd brought order to his chaos, light to the darkness that had engulfed him after Marianne's passing. Thomas adored her. And Xavier. Xavier had begun looking for her as soon as he returned home each day, eager to share the day's events, to hear her gentle laugh, to watch her with his son. When had that happened? When had she become essential rather than convenient? The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He'd begun to care for Willow Eden as more than his son's caretaker or even a friend. The knowledge terrified him. Back at the ranch, Xavier threw himself into work, avoiding the main house where Willow would be with Thomas. His feelings were irrelevant. What mattered was protecting her reputation and her job. And if that meant maintaining more distance between them, so be it. For the next week, Xavier left before dawn and returned after dark. He took his meals in the bunkhouse with his hands, citing ranch business that needed attention. He saw Thomas only when the baby was already asleep, and Willow only in passing. If she noticed the change, she said nothing, though her eyes followed him with questions he refused to answer. On the 7th day of this new routine, Xavier returned well after sunset to find Willow waiting on his porch. Thomas was not with her, and her expression was resolute in the lamplight. "I've put Thomas down for the night," she said as he approached. "We need to talk." Xavier removed his hat, suddenly aware of his disheveled appearance after a day working cattle. "Is something wrong with Thomas?" "Thomas is perfectly fine," she assured him. "It's you I'm concerned about." He sighed, mounting the steps. "I'm just busy, Willow. Summer's always the heaviest workload." "You've been avoiding me," she stated plainly, "and by extension, your son." The accusation stung because it contained truth. "I've had a lot on my mind." "Then share it," she challenged. "We were friends before we were employer and employee. Were they friends?" The label seemed insufficient for what had grown between them. Xavier sat heavily on the porch bench, elbows on his knees. "I went to see Judge Parker," he admitted, "about the rumors affecting your position." Surprise flickered across her face. "That wasn't necessary." "It was," he insisted. "This situation is my doing. I won't have you losing your livelihood because of it." "And what did the judge say?" Xavier studied his hands, calloused, tanned, marked with the small scars of ranch work. "He suggested that if we were courting officially, it would nullify the gossip." A long silence followed his words. When he finally looked up, Willow's expression was unreadable in the dim light. "I see," she said finally. "And this suggestion is why you've been avoiding me? Because you find the idea so objectionable?" "What? No." Xavier straightened. "I thought you would find it objectionable. You're young, educated. You could have your pick of suitable men, not a widower with a baby and too much responsibility." Something shifted in her expression. "Perhaps you should let me decide what I find objectionable, Xavier Calloway." Her use of his full name brought him up short. "Willow, no," she interrupted, rising from the bench. "You've been making decisions without consulting me, decisions that affect my life as much as yours. That stops now." Her voice was firm but not unkind. "I care for Thomas as if he were my own. I respect and admire you more than any man I've known. If you avoid me because you don't share those feelings, I can accept that. But if you're avoiding me because you think you know what's best for me, then you don't know me at all." With that, she turned and walked down the porch steps. "Willow, wait." Xavier was on his feet, catching up to her in the yard. "Please." She stopped but didn't turn. "What do you want, Xavier?" The question stripped him bare. What did he want? Peace for his son. Success for his ranch. And increasingly, impossibly, he wanted Willow, her smile in the mornings, her wisdom throughout his days, her quiet companionship in the evenings. "I want you to stay," he said finally. "Not just for Thomas. For me." She turned then, her face pale in the moonlight. "As your employee? As whatever you're willing to be," he answered honestly. "Friend. Companion. Maybe more someday. If you wanted that." Her eyes searched his face. "Are you asking to court me, Xavier Calloway?" The question hung between them in the night air. Xavier took a deep breath. "Yes, Willow Eden. I believe I am." For a moment she was still. Then a smile broke across her face like sunrise. "It's about time." Xavier blinked, caught off guard by her response. "You're not upset? I've been waiting weeks for you to realize what was happening between us," she said, laughter in her voice. "I was beginning to think you were the most oblivious man in the Wyoming territory." "I might be," he admitted, a smile tugging at his lips. "Does that mean you accept?" "It means," Willow said, stepping closer, "that I would be honored to court you properly, Xavier. For Thomas's sake, for propriety's sake, but mostly for our own sakes." Relief and joy flooded through him. Impulsively, he reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture more formal than any they'd shared before. "Thank you," he murmured against her fingers. Her other hand came to rest lightly on his cheek. "You don't need to thank me for wanting what I already want." From the house came the faint sound of Thomas beginning to fuss. Willow smiled. "He has impeccable timing. Like his father," Xavier quipped, reluctantly releasing her hand. As they walked back to the house together, a comfortable silence settled between them, the silence of a shared understanding, of possibilities opening rather than closing. Inside, Willow lifted Thomas from his cradle, automatically beginning that gentle swaying motion, like the wind through wheat. Xavier watched them, marveling at how this woman and child had reshaped his world when he thought it ended with Marianne's death. "Would you like to try?" Willow asked, offering Thomas to him. Xavier took his son, mimicking Willow's gentle rhythm. Thomas's cries subsided almost immediately. "Well, I'll be," he murmured. "You're learning," Willow said softly. "I have a good teacher." He met her gaze over Thomas's downy head. For more than just baby rocking, the smile she gave him warmed parts of his heart he'd thought permanently chilled. Outside, the summer wind whispered through the trees, a counterpoint to Thomas's settling breaths and the quiet understanding growing between the adults. News of their courtship spread quickly through the small community. Most reactions were positive. Xavier was respected, and Willow was adored by her pupils and their parents. Even Mrs. Blackwell's objections quieted when Judge Parker himself expressed approval of the match. Their courtship proceeded with proper decorum. Xavier called at Willow's cabin each evening after supper, often bringing Thomas. They sat on her small porch, talking as the baby slept between them. On Sundays, they attended church together, presenting a united front to the community. Occasionally, they drove into town for social gatherings, careful to maintain appropriate behavior while making their attachment clear. Throughout July and into August, their relationship deepened. Xavier found himself sharing thoughts he'd never voiced to anyone, his dreams for the ranch, his fears for Thomas's future, his memories of his parents long gone. Willow spoke of her childhood in Ohio, her decision to come west for adventure, her love of teaching. They discovered shared values: hard work, honesty, education, and complementary differences that strengthened rather than divided them. Physical expressions remained chaste: a hand squeeze, an arm offered for stability, occasionally a brief kiss to Willow's knuckles. The restraint was both proper and maddening, particularly for Xavier, who found himself increasingly drawn to Willow's quiet beauty and inner strength. One evening in late August, they sat on the main house's porch after putting Thomas to bed. The air held a hint of autumn's approach, and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. "School begins in 2 weeks," Willow remarked, her hands busy with mending. Xavier nodded, the reminder a weight on his chest. "You'll be moving back to town." "It would be sensible," she agreed, though her tone lacked conviction. "The cabin is too far to travel daily when winter comes." The thought of Willow leaving of quiet evenings without her presence, of Thomas missing her daily care, sat like lead in Xavier's stomach. These months had shown him what his life could be with her in it. The prospect of returning to solitude was unbearable. "Unless there was another solution," he said carefully. Willow set her mending aside. "What kind of solution?" Xavier took a deep breath. He'd been carrying his mother's ring in his pocket for a week, waiting for the right moment. This wasn't how he'd planned to ask, but suddenly waiting another day seemed impossible. "Marry me," he said simply. Willow went very still. "Xavier, I know it's soon," he rushed on. "I know there's proper mourning time and all that, but Marianne wouldn't have wanted Thomas and me to be alone. And I don't want to be without you, Willow." Her eyes searched his face. "Are you certain? Marriage is—" "I'm more certain of this than anything in my life," he interrupted. "I love you, Willow Eden. I didn't expect to love anyone after Marianne, but here you are, and here I am, completely in love with you. Marry me. Be Thomas's mother in truth. Be my wife." Tears welled in Willow's eyes. "Oh, Xavier, I love you too. I've loved you since I saw you trying so hard to comfort Thomas that first day." Hope surged through him. "Is that a yes?" Instead of answering, Willow leaned forward and pressed her lips to their first real kiss, sweet and soft and full of promise. When she pulled away, her smile outshone the emerging stars. "Yes, Xavier Calloway," she whispered. "I'll marry you." They were married 2 weeks later in the town's small church, with Thomas cooing in Judge Parker's arms as he performed the ceremony. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set under the cottonwoods and lanterns glowing as twilight descended. The entire community turned out to celebrate, ranchers and townsfolk alike, acknowledging the rightness of this union. Later, after the guests had departed and Thomas slept soundly in his cradle, Xavier and Willow stood on the porch of what was now their shared home. His arm encircled her waist, her head rested against his shoulder, and both gazed up at the vast Wyoming sky, brilliant with stars. "Happy?" Xavier asked, dropping a kiss onto her honey-blonde hair. Willow tilted her face up to his, her expression luminous in the moonlight. "Completely." He kissed her then, no longer constrained by propriety, pouring all his gratitude and love into the connection. When they parted, breathless, Willow's eyes held a promise that made his heart race. "I never thought I'd find this again," he confessed. "After Marianne, I thought that part of my life was over." "Life has a way of surprising you," Willow replied, tracing his jawline with gentle fingers. "Sometimes with challenges we think we can't overcome." "Like a colicky baby?" he teased. "Exactly," she laughed. "And sometimes with joys we never dared hope for." From inside came Thomas's whimper, beginning to build toward a cry. Xavier sighed, resting his forehead against Willow's. "Speaking of challenges." "Together," she said, taking his hand and leading him inside to their son. Xavier lifted Thomas from his cradle, automatically beginning that gentle swaying motion that had become second nature. "Like the wind through wheat," he murmured, smiling at his wife as Thomas quieted against his chest. "You've learned well," Willow observed, pride warming her voice. "I had a good teacher," he replied, extending his free arm to draw her close. "In more ways than one." Thomas settled between them, already drifting back to sleep, secure in his father's strong arms and his new mother's loving presence. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered around the corners of the house they would fill with love and perhaps, someday, more children. Inside, the rhythm of their new family took hold steady and sure as a heartbeat, gentle and constant as breath. 5 years later, the laughter of children filtered through the open windows of the Calloway ranch house, carried on the warm June breeze. Xavier paused in the dooryard, listening to the sweet sound with a smile that hadn't left his face in days. Thomas, now 5 years old and the spitting image of his father, sat at the kitchen table with Willow, earnestly practicing his letters. Beside them in a cradle, 2-week-old Margaret Rose Calloway slept peacefully, one tiny fist curled against her cheek. And toddling around the kitchen on sturdy legs was 3-year-old James, babbling happily as he followed his mother's movements with devoted eyes. Xavier removed his hat before entering, not wanting to track dust onto Willow's clean floors. The scene that greeted him was so perfect it made his chest ache. His family, healthy and thriving in the home they'd built together. "Pa!" Thomas spotted him first, abandoning his slate to race across the room. Xavier caught him mid-leap, swinging him up for a hug. "How's the writing coming along, Cowboy?" he asked, setting his oldest son on his hip. "Miss Willow says I'm the best in my age group," Thomas announced proudly. Xavier's eyebrow rose as he looked to his wife. "Miss Willow, is it?" Willow laughed, rising to greet him with a kiss. "Only during lessons. He says Ma the rest of the time." Her eyes, still that warm autumn brown that had first captivated him, danced with amusement. "How was town?" "Busy. Everyone sends their congratulations on little Margaret." He peered into the cradle at his daughter, still marveling at her perfect fingers and rosebud mouth. "She's been peaceful?" "An angel," Willow confirmed as James attached himself to Xavier's leg. "Unlike her brother here, who's been into everything today." Xavier scooped up his younger son with his free arm. "That right, James? Giving your ma trouble?" James grinned, revealing new teeth. "No trouble. That means yes," Thomas translated solemnly, making the adults laugh. Xavier set the boys down, sending them to wash up for supper. Alone with Willow for a moment, he pulled her into his arms, breathing in the scent of her lavender soap mingled with baby powder and the indefinable essence that was uniquely her. "I missed you today," he murmured against her hair. She leaned into him, her body fitting perfectly against his. "We missed you too, though I had plenty of company." She nodded toward the children. Thomas helped with his letters, and James tried to help with the baking. "And how did that go?" "Let's just say the chickens enjoyed the results more than we would have," she replied with a laugh. Xavier chuckled, then grew serious. "Are you happy, Willow? Truly?" She drew back to look at him, surprise in her expression. "What brings that question?" He shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Just thinking about how much has changed. You were the town's teacher. Now you're stuck out here with 3 children and a ranch to help run." "Stuck?" Willow's eyebrows rose. "Xavier Calloway, I chose this life. I chose you and Thomas, and then we chose to have James and Margaret together." She placed a hand against his cheek. "I still teach Thomas and the ranch hand's children who come for lessons. I have a husband who partners with me in everything. I have healthy, beautiful children." Her voice softened. "How could I be anything but completely happy?" Relief washed through him. "I just want to be sure I've given you the life you deserve." "You've given me more," she assured him, stretching up to kiss him softly. "You gave me a family when I thought I might never have one. You gave me love when I'd almost stopped looking for it." From across the room, Margaret began to stir, her tiny face scrunching as she worked up to a cry. Xavier moved to the cradle, lifting his daughter with the practiced ease of an experienced father. "Hello, little lady," he murmured, cradling her against his chest and beginning that gentle swaying motion that had become instinct. "Your pa's home now." Margaret's cries subsided almost immediately as Xavier rocked her. Like the wind through wheat. The phrase that had once seemed so foreign now felt like part of him, a reminder of how far he'd come from those desperate days after Thomas's birth. Willow watched them, love evident in her gaze. She already knows her pa's arms are the safest place in the world. Second safest, Xavier corrected. After her mother's. Thomas and James returned, faces damp from washing, ready for the evening meal. As the family gathered around the table, Xavier with Margaret still nestled against his shoulder, Willow helping James with his plate, Thomas solemnly saying grace, Xavier felt a contentment so complete it nearly overwhelmed him. 5 years ago, he'd been drowning in grief and responsibility, unable to comfort his newborn son, certain his life had ended along with Marianne's. Then Willow had appeared on his porch with bread, stew, and wisdom about rocking babies slowly, like wind through wheat fields. Now here they were, a family forged from loss and found in love, stronger for the journey that had brought them together. Outside, the actual wind rustled through the ripening wheat fields that surrounded the ranch, a sound that would forever remind Xavier of the woman who had taught him how to be a father, shown him he could love again, and given him a second chance at happiness on the Wyoming frontier. As if reading his thoughts, Willow reached across the table to squeeze his hand, her wedding ring catching the evening light. "All right?" she asked softly. Xavier looked at his family, his beautiful, unexpected, miraculous family, and smiled. "Better than all right," he answered. "Perfect." And it was.